All right, we are here in the Fireside PM podcast for our first ever panel discussion. Usually, this podcast is one-on-one interviews, but I was in a sort of nerd forum talking about AI stuff, and I said, "Hey guys, I have this product management podcast. If anybody wants to talk about what it's like to PM an AI based product, let me know." And Arun, Vipul, and Ryan all raised their hands. So here we are. We're going to have three sections. First, we'll start talking about introducing ourselves in general. And then we'll talk about product management overall, how we think about the profession, and then spend hopefully most of our time talking about whether how it's different or similar when you PM a product that's based on or relies heavily on artificial intelligence. And then we'll wrap it up with some closing thoughts. And if folks are watching us live, you're welcome to put stuff in the chat and I can try and call out those questions as they come up. But why don't we start with Arun and then Vipul and then Ryan with introductions, and then we'll get into the general discussion. Arun, welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Tom. Appreciate the opportunity. So my name's Arun. I'm a product lead at Microsoft Health AI. I own product and design for a collaboration with Nuance, essentially the DAX product, which is ambient clinical intelligence. So essentially any physician-patient conversation gets converted into a clinical note and put into the EHR. So there's different AI technologies being used, speech to text, and then summarization. Before joining Microsoft, I was one of the founding members of Health AI at AWS. I launched a couple of products there, Amazon Comprehend Medical, and was the PM for Health Lake until private preview.
Welcome, Arun. Now, I should probably mention that all of us are here in our own capacity, speaking on our own individual behalf about product management. We might happen to work in places during the daytime, but we're not here to represent. I'm sure our bosses would appreciate us making that disclaimer.
Thank you. Yes.
Vipul, welcome.
Yeah, hi. Name's Vipul Kashyap. I lead the clinical informatics and product strategy function at Buddi AI. Our key product is automated coding. We begin from where Arun stops. We look at the patient charts and we extract out codes. But we are now, my role is to take this function and strategize how to integrate it into the clinical workflow. So for example, we are looking at clinical documentation improvement. We're looking at quality metrics. We're looking at prior auth. We're looking at clinical decision support, because once you're able to analyze patient charts and extract codes, I think it opens up a whole bunch of things for you. And of course, I didn't mention it, but we of course use AI to extract codes from charts. But thanks.
Welcome, people. Thank you. Ryan.
Thank you, Tom. So hello, everyone. I'm Ryan Cunningham. I'm a senior associate builder at AI Fund, which is Andrew Ng's venture studio in Palo Alto. So as a senior associate builder, really the builder role is just kind of a hybrid between a product manager and an investor. So a venture studio is structured a little bit differently than a venture capital fund, as you may or may not know, because instead of just investing in ideas that already exist, we are very active in the origination and the creation of companies at the idea stage. And that requires a lot of product work for us, because if you ever co-founded a company, you know exactly what goes into it. And we have to do that many times over with incredibly talented entrepreneurs that we bring in-house and work alongside. Prior to working at AI Fund, I was at Uber for many years across a number of operations and product roles on Uber Eats in the first few months that it launched, after it launched rather. So breakneck growth on that. Uber Elevate, which is our flying car and drone delivery initiative, and Jump, which was our light electric vehicle moonshot.
Welcome, Ryan. And I'll introduce myself for those who don't know me. I'm Tom. I'm Director of Product Management at Google Health, focused on a number of our products for clinicians. It's a crazy coincidence that Arun and Vipul both raised their hand to join the panel. This wasn't meant to be a health AI panel, but it turns out that there's a bit of it on it, which is cool. Prior to Google Health, I was at YouTube working on our creator platform, and then a few startups as well as Microsoft many moons ago. So welcome to everybody for joining us on this panel. Let's start with, in general, do you think product management what is product management to you in 2022? And then, do you think it's very different from product management for non-AI based products? Or do you think it's fundamentally requires different competencies when you kind of introduce, a heavy AI element? Who wants to go first? We can popcorn this one.
We can keep this game scheduled, maybe.
Yeah. So you're saying go clockwise? Is that what
Yeah,
you're saying?
just go.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, Arun.
Well, it's a loaded question. I will say that. I do think so. From my experience, it's been also based on the company culture. A lot of how the PM operates. I've seen at AWS, you are the CEO of your product. I mean, everything from the P&L to working with marketing, working with BD. You are kind of driving that. At Microsoft, it's very matrixed, and I think that kind of understanding what has worked well through your PM career and creating that rhythm of business for your new team is kind of the best way, at least in my experience, of doing it. But you have to kind of really adapt to the culture of PM and kind of the matrix products that exist. Like for Microsoft, there's so much that's going on versus an AWS, which is, to be honest, a developer and API-driven company, which is much more boxed, right? But that's been my experience so far.
All right, so I'll go next. I kind of align with what Arun said, given that one of my primary roles is to drive product strategy at Buddi. Essentially, you need to understand and, in fact, carve out a market. You need to understand the need. You need to create a roadmap. And then I think the most critical part, this is where I think product management plays a huge role, is when you break up work, you need to break up work not in terms of tasks and deadlines, but in terms of value. What is that nugget of value which will get you DV by DM? What is the differential market you get for every value you bring to the table? So that's the critical piece. So I think that is where a lot of negotiation happens, because that is on the other side balanced by feasibility and technical architecture. So there's a dance between the product manager and product owner. So that's the dance I do every day. It's a dance about value and feasibility and technical complexity. Those are three areas. Competencies for AI, I think there are some very key differences I have noticed in my career. So first of all, we can leverage whatever product management framework you use. I don't think that's an issue, but there are two things we need to understand. One is a data competency. People really need to understand that it's garbage in, garbage out. You need to really have solid, high quality data going in. And that's the elephant in the room, which is not discussed. That's number one. And the number two is your building of AI has to be driven by value. I understand there is a sense where AI folks want to go in a room and experiment, but that can be a separate R&D stream. But at the end of the day, what is the value your AI model is computing? So, and I'm guessing we're going to get into more details, but very quickly, the 2 points where it impacts is the data piece and the value piece, because either the AI should make a certain feature better, cheaper, faster, or it should even enable an absolutely new feature, which we were not even thinking of. So if those are the, again, we'll get into more details, but I think those are the two big buckets I would bring into the product management framework. So I'll just stop here, and then I guess we can get into more details.
Yeah. Thanks, Vipul. Ryan.
Sure. So echoing what Arun and Vipul, I think, have already said up to now, I would say that a very general answer would be that a product manager in any organization is mostly responsible for the translation of business goals into engineering terms in order to lead the engineers to actually build the thing, whatever the thing actually is. And to Arun's point, of course, that's going to require a lot of meetings. You're meeting with marketing, you're meeting with whoever owns the P&L, whoever owns the budget. you're meeting with designers, you're meeting with all sorts of individuals in order to ensure that the customer needs are translated into the language that they understand the most. That is the most general answer. I think that the CEO moniker that's usually assigned, like you're the CEO of the product, it's accurate in that sense, in that you're touching all the teams. But it is also, for new PMs who haven't done it yet, it's also misleading in that you don't have the authority actually to tell them what to do. You're not the CEO officially, so you really have to learn how to influence with your knowledge of actually what the customer needs, how to express that in languages that they can understand and that they can empathize with, and just through sheer tyranny of will, because you don't actually have the authority to make it happen, influence others to achieve that goal. That's a very general definition, but it applies across a lot of different types of products. For artificial intelligence products, however, it's a little bit different. A common mistake that new PMs make is assuming that the agile workflows are going to work the same for when you actually ship an AI product. And that just, works kind of like a waterfall. Once it's done, you move on to the next thing. And with AI products, it's never really like that. The first thing that you're going to ship is almost always terrible. It will not meet your acceptability threshold. But the entire point is to ship an iterative loop that will improve that over time, and making sure that you've communicated that to your customers and to your stakeholders as well, that this is a learning process and it will actually get there. So that's number one, is the difference between just shipping the thing and launching it and never coming back to it, versus understanding that this is going to be a learning process, and the first thing is almost never going to meet the acceptability thresholds. We're going to get into a lot of it, but expectations management on the data literacy piece that Vipul was talking about, you're going to be the most data literate person on this team. The other stakeholders who have now probably worked with AI products before, designers, marketers, even the executives, don't understand this piece as much. So you need to be able to influence their expectations using your data literacy.
So much to go into. I'll share my thoughts, and then would love to highlight a couple things that I heard for us to kind of unpack a little further. My thoughts are, I'm a little bit old school in that I feel like product managers always have to be laser focused on solving customer problems, irrespective of the hot technology of the decade. So, when I got started, it was in 99, so obviously the internet was kind of a big deal. And then there was XML and web services, and then there was mobile, and then there was social, and then there was local, and now AI and ML, and in the future, who knows, quantum or whatever. And they're all incredibly impactful and sometimes transformative, but they still require a product that solves a customer's problem way better than that customer's alternatives. And that has not changed as far as I've seen. But I will agree completely that a lot of generalist PMs who go into working on products that rely on AI may take the data part for granted, because, it's not that hard to get data for normal features. But, when you start building models and stuff, and especially in complex regulated environments, the data is more difficult, and you have to be more careful and all that kind of thing. But what are the panel's thoughts around, are there other things in addition to data literacy that are unique requirements for AI-based products? Because a lot of the stuff we have talked about, matrix organizations, like bringing people together, like iterating, adding value. You could argue we could have had this panel 10 years ago and talked about those things.
Yeah, I'd love. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. With for example, with Comprehend Medical, we made some decisions because of the industry that we're in. Like, we made the service stateless, that we don't train any models on customer data. Like, certain things you have to do because, at least, of the industry. But even our messaging was wrong, because when you go into healthcare specifically, you're going against people who have been trained for a very long period of time to do their job. and you're telling them that you can do it better than they can. And so that messaging initially has to change with AI products. What we ended up doing is instead of saying like, this will help you with coding or reimbursement, for example, because that was a use case that we went after, we said we're giving you a superpower. We're helping you be more efficient at your job. We're giving you this ability to. So like that messaging piece, I didn't have it right in the beginning. It kind of evolved as I talked to more customers and got feedback. But I think with AI products, you have to have a customization layer to improve the models. You're not going to get it right out of the box. And in some industries, it's going to be critical that you kind of communicate that to customers, because if they think that you are going to solve the problem with your product, then they're probably going to be very resistant to using it or even testing it.
I will double down on what Arun said. Arun, are you done?
Yeah, I'm done. Yeah.
I'm going to double down big time, especially in healthcare, because there are two things. Number one, and it kind of ties into what Ryan says, you have to almost bring in the customer as a stakeholder. You have to build a relationship with it. It's all about relationship building. Now, let me give you an example. AI has been around for a long time. 1980, there was a system developed, an AI-based system developed in Stanford called Mycin for antibiotic prescribing. It performed fascinatingly. It was a combination of rule-based expert systems and Bayesian logic, whatever that is. We can get into it, but it outperformed doctors, but it did not succeed, right? And then I think you cannot go to a doctor and tell them we'll do better antibiotic prescribing than you. It doesn't work. So I think this more about augmented AI is a better messaging. So you hit the nail on the head, Arun. Even Watson Health failed for a very similar reason. You cannot give a recommendation to a physician at the point of care without explaining to him why you did it. And AI has this weird problem. Again, pardon me, I'm just speaking very specifically to healthcare, right? Either it's so simple that the physician will tell you, hey, I knew it all along, or it is so out of the world that the physician won't believe you, right? How do you crack that conundrum? So the way you crack it is you need to make it explainable. For healthcare, you cannot go anywhere with explainability. And I may even go far as to say that we may want to sacrifice a little bit on accuracy, but if you're able to explain yourself, we will get much better adoption. And you can challenge me on this. So I'm just going to summarize with two things. In the acceptance criteria for all the AI-based features you write, you need to have criteria which, of course, talk about the accuracy of the model, but also talk about the explainability of the model. I think without that, I think any AI-based product feature set, at least in the healthcare context, is going nowhere. So I'll just stop here, and there are other workflow-related issues and all that. We can get to that, but
yeah, Ryan, I'd love to hear your thoughts, because you've got three sort of health folks who encounter users who are like, hey, I don't know how you came up with this thing, or why should I believe it, or is it going to replace me? I'm curious, do you hear that at the AI Fund when you work on non-health oriented AI-based products as well, or is this, you think, unique to like the vertical that the three of us work in?
Well, I do actually, and it depends on the industry. But I would say that in general, a lot of the tension that I think is being highlighted has a lot to do with, say, Western versus Eastern philosophies with respect to robotics or artificial intelligence. In the West, we usually have this latent fear or insecurity around displacement via AI. So we usually use the Terminator as an analogy that inspires fear, I guess, in people's hearts. I'm like, my job, it's going to be automated away. You see these articles all the time. Whereas in the East, in Japan especially, which has been using robotics for many decades, it's seen not as a displacement, but as augmentation of your human level intellect. So there are things, obviously, that algorithms do much better than humans. This is usually, I think, system 2 level thinking, as Kahneman puts it, in terms of higher cognitive load, a lot of math, a lot of calculations. Artificial intelligence is much better suited for that. A lot of Eastern companies get that, and they don't have as much insecurity with respect to AI in their workflows. The types of industries, though, that are going to have these types of tensions that you're mentioning are usually very regulatory bound. So a lot of financial services or fintech companies that I've worked on definitely emphasize the explainability component that Vipul is talking about. There are a lot of protected characteristics out there of what features you can and cannot use to promote or to give access to certain financial products. And even if you build some sort of a black box model, some deep learning model that is far and away much more accurate in, say, determining creditworthiness than a explainable one, for instance, random forest or XGBoost or something, that's not going to pass because the organization is going to need the ability to audit how the model actually performs. And without an understanding of how the features are actually weighted or how they interact with one another, you're not going to be able to do that. It is very difficult to fully explain how a deep learning model works. And anybody who tells you otherwise is probably trying to sell you something.
So true. One thing that I heard actually this week on the All In podcast, they were talking about how will AI startups differentiate themselves in the long run, or companies. And there was an argument that, well, yeah, there's this great like open AI stuff and it's super cool, but over time, developing models and training them won't be a differentiating factor. And I'm curious, what does the panel think in the long run will separate the big winners from others who are using AI and making it more part of their product just as a normal course of operations?
Yeah, I think I have a different kind of view of this. And I think that in the end, AI services is kind of a depreciating asset, right? Over a period of time, it's going to be cheaper and cheaper and easier to do. I think where the IP for customers comes into that customization layer, because there's only so much you can do. So whether it's federated learning and they create their own models or however they do it, they will own their IP primarily through the data they have, and then kind of plus oneing up the model that the pre-trained model that you may have. But at least from a cloud perspective, from a healthcare, we're still in the lift and shift of data into the cloud for healthcare. We're still like, that hasn't happened yet. These AI services are more like a carrot, saying that once your data actually comes to the cloud, there's a lot you can actually do with it. So sometimes these services are not necessarily going to be huge revenue generators. They're just basically going to pull in. And so that's kind of how I see our innovation cycle, as in going after use cases that when their data comes, they can use it immediately. But we're still kind of that early cycle with healthcare specifically.
Yeah, I completely agree with the early cycle path. I think from a differentiator point of view, those companies will win who optimize their models for business value. So let's take an example that I am an AI model builder and I'm building a model, right? And today I optimize my model for false positive, false negatives, take your favorite, specificity, whatever it is. But if I'm able to retune my model, if I get a very good articulation and metrics which capture business metrics in a mathematical form, and I use that to drive the creation of the model. So what happens is there are situations where the model may not be accurate, but may give much more business value. So that is one big differentiator, which I think people are missing. The other thing is around explainability. We beat that ad nauseum, and then that's where the regulatory agencies start coming in. Part of explainability is you also have to convince the user that you didn't have bias, there was equity. All these things will start coming in slow, at least in healthcare. These are very, very important. You don't want to be in a situation where you recommend a treatment for don't recommend a treatment for an African American, but you recommend for other races. You'll be in big trouble at that point. So I think that's number two. And number three, it's like a weird thing. The true success of an AI system is when people don't even understand there's an AI system. It seems very natural to them, right? It kind of is very transparent to them. So that is those companies which are able to seamlessly go into the business workflows and seamlessly drive business value are going to win. And that may require a rethinking of the way they do their models and the rethinking of way. So for example, if we build a model, we quite often we build it without understanding the context in the business workflow it's going to be deployed in. That comes later, right? So anyway, so those are my two big suggestions for potential future differentiators.
Sorry, Ryan, before you start, I just had I had a question to you guys, if you don't mind. Sorry, Tom. But like when you look at, and I'm sure you have this in other industries, like look at providers, for example, Vipul, to your example, their margins are razor thin, right?
Yep.
I mean, investing in these technologies is hard. How do you, and AI is built into larger product suites, right? How do you kind of balance that? Because the business value, in at least I think in a lot of cases with AI, it's very obvious, kind of as Ryan was talking, West versus East kind of thinking. How do you actually get through that? Like, I feel like it's a lot harder than, than you say, okay, you can save so many dollars or you can make so many dollars. It sometimes that message doesn't really land.
Yeah. So from a messaging point of view, it's very, very critical. Personally, I mean, we can have a much deeper debate on this, but I'm going to be a little controversial and tell you that AI is more. It's easier to explain the value of AI on the clinical research side rather than on the care delivery side.
Yeah.
That's number one. Number two, you hinted at the fact that providers have very thin margins. We all know that, and they are very hesitant in exploring. I think there you need an industry shift to happen. Only when providers start taking more risk, and I'm talking value-based care here, and when they understand that they need the ability to predict and manage their populations because now they are on the hook for outcomes, that's when they will start investing in AI. So unfortunately, that answer is beyond the AI piece. That's more of the regulation piece. But we can have a much more detailed discussion, because the one very obvious place where AI can help is auto coding. Right? It does. I know people don't like it. It's not sexy because it's not clinical and all that. And yeah, so that's my 2-minute suggestion.
Yeah, I think the communication of value that AI actually delivers is, as both of you point out, a very delicate path to walk. I love Vipul's suggestion that the entire point is that it is supposed to feel very natural and that you are not explicitly telling the customer our AI is doing like A, B, and C and all this stuff, because they're not going to care. They're hearing from everybody else who, say, built a regression model 2 years ago and hasn't updated it, that we use AI in our company, and that's why we deliver a better solution. So, I mean, to that end, if the value prop is going to be something that is, say, you save a certain amount of dollars, or maybe you enhance your targeting by a certain percentage, these are really like 1.1x or 2x types of improvements on their existing services, and so then the conversation just kind of gets bogged down in price. That's not a very fun position to be in. And I've been in companies before that have struggled in their value proposition and communicating that because most of the time their customers sort of see them in this deluge of other wannabe AI companies, so to speak. So that depends on the value that the customer is ascribing to the actual problem that you're trying to solve. At AI Fund, our tacit requirement that we have when looking at early stage ideas is that the value proposition is truly a 10x improvement, an order of magnitude better than what they are doing today. A practical example of that outside of AI would be, say, like AirPods versus a bunch of tangled headphones, because you're saving 10x the time immediately of just not having to deal with the tangled aspect of it. But a more practical example for the AI context would be, I used fintech earlier, for instance, model risk management teams at investment banks, or financial services institutions, not just investment banks, but they have to be using a workflow in which they work with compliance teams, the model developers do, in order to make sure that their models that they are shipping are actually up to par. And when I say up to par, I mean you're not using protected characteristics. They pass some rubric that says this is acceptable from an auditor's perspective. But those workflows they're terrible. It's all done through phone and email. There's a regulatory barrier that exists so that the teams can't actually sit together and work together on these things in order to avoid a potential conflict of interest. So the rate at which they can actually ship models to be used in banking products is incredibly slow, and it is necessarily slow. But one of the companies that we actually built, ValidMind, has built a workflow that is purpose built to resolve this problem and actually 10x the number of models that they are able to approve using the same relationship between compliance risk officers and model developers. And all of that has to do with just reducing the friction that exists in trying to facilitate communication. So it's taking the type of collaborative software experience that you come to see with Asana or Google Docs or anything else, and then just applying that in a very specific context for improving how models actually get built and reviewed in otherwise very red tape strewn organizations. So to have a long story made short, we try to focus on the ideas that are actually have an order of magnitude improvement over the existing customer solution. And if you find yourself in a position where that is not the case, then it is very difficult to navigate out of the pricing conversation for the 1 or 2x improvements.
If I may come in, Tom.
Yeah, please.
Completely agree. I think the challenge though is even if there is a 10x improvement, how do you convince your customer that it is indeed the case, right? So that's the challenge. So I think there are two suggestions which are just coming into mind. Treat your customer as a stakeholder. What you tell him is that you pay me on outcomes. Don't pay me on the number of models I ship you. Pay me on the number your compliance workflow company, right? Pay me on the money you saved in your compliance processes. Give me a percentage of that. That's number one. Number two is give contractual guarantees on accuracy. That's what we do with Buddi AI. We go in with a contractual guarantee that we will, no matter what, deliver 95% plus accuracy on 70% of the charts we analyze. And then we typically beat that, but it's okay. I mean, that's how we. So if you want, I mean, would love to see your thoughts on how do you break that communication of value barrier. Maybe that's really what is holding AI back, I think.
Oh, definitely. And I want to fully acknowledge that my bias is strongly towards very early stage development, in which say the product may not already exist. So there's a huge jump in value that you go from not existing to existing. And a lot of how this is done for us is we bring in customers who have already been basically clamoring for something. They say, we know this problem exists. I will pay you to fix it. I don't know how I don't know what that's going to look like, but I know it when I see it. And those are usually the best customers to have as development partners that even if it's just an LOI that you get signed, are very, very involved and very, very helpful in shaping the initial version that you do ship. I recognize that's very different than, say, much later stage organizations that are adding artificial intelligence to otherwise manual workflows that have existed up to now.
I was just at an industry conference a few weeks ago, and there are hundreds of exhibitors in Vegas, talking, and they all said they used AI. And I feel like one of the differentiators for, yeah, right. Everybody did it. Even like the beverage stand was like, yes, we use.
How many said they were using blockchain too?
Yeah, that's right. And so I think one of the differentiators is who can actually deliver. Go beyond the pitch deck and the website and the quick demo, and actually have a product, maybe to Vipul's point, that doesn't feel like it's necessarily AI in your face, but it just works better because of AI. And, that's hard. It's hard to pull off because of all the stuff that Ryan was talking about in terms of like the collaboration between compliance and modeling and data and product and UX and marketing and sales and pricing. I mean, it's and there aren't a lot of examples of companies that I think have really landed AI as effectively or have reached their full potential. There's a lot of talk out there. But, I would imagine execution will be, especially in this economic environment, a key differentiator. So who can deliver?
For sure. There's a stat that I usually quote, which is BCG, the consulting company, and MIT Sloan have an annual survey that they usually put out in order to try to quantify what percentage of enterprises, large and small, have actually seen a positive financial ROI in their AI initiatives that they've shipped. And the number usually comes back at about 1 in 10, maybe 10% of the companies that have actually put out an AI initiative of some sort have actually returned like positive revenue or profit or whatever the objective is from that development. But interestingly, it's not because there's a low enthusiasm at the executive level. Many times these organizations actually have a chief AI officer or chief transformation officer or whatever you want to call it to try to integrate that. It's not for lack of funding either. Typically, it's that there's a low AI literacy in the teams that are actually building the thing. It's bad expectations management from the teams that are actually trying to build a solution, because the corporate executive who told them, can you use AI to transform this entire part of the industry, or not industry, but this entire part of the company, did a very poor job in trying to make that actionable. Or they didn't actually arm the development team with an AI PM or effective product connections to actually translate business goals into smaller, actionable targets that they could go after. So this lack of an integrated sort of human AI system, if you will, is usually the death knell for most companies that try to just pour money at a problem and call it AI, versus those that actually take a more thoughtful approach and succeed.
Yeah, and I think like you have to. Oh, sorry, Tom. Like to what you were saying, Ryan. It's just like, if you're talking about a model where you put in data and you get a result out, that's one kind of approach. But then there are issues in data curation, there are issues in data labeling, there are issues with model drift. There's so many different companies that are tackling a single problem to make developers like low code, no code, to make it easier for them to launch these models. So like, I think there's Tom, to your initial question, there's these companies that are enabling tools, and then these are companies that are trying to create these applications that solve it. And I don't know who is going to win, but I think hyper focusing on one problem is an easier way to, instead of tackling a lot. So I feel like, whether it's a snorkel or whatever they're focusing on right now, once they understand that and they're enabling a lot of the partners and their customers, then they can tackle bigger problems. But that's kind of at least what I'm seeing from a high level.
Yeah, I think the other question we need to ask ourselves is, are we choosing the right problem to go after? Because you can, when you have AI, everything looks like a nail, right? So, and I'll tell you my experience from healthcare. There are a lot of situations I've come across where people generally try to build models where models are not required. It's a simple rule-based thing. Just go write a rule, just go get done with it, move on, go for the problems where the model is required. So I think that is one issue. The other issue is there is always this problem about data. Do we even have enough data to train all the models? And I think what we should look at are things like customizing a foundational model, taking a foundational model like Sky Spacey and doing something with it, or transfer learning to some extent, or leveraging ontologies. At least in healthcare, there are a huge number of ontologies. They have not been properly leveraged. UMLS, everyone knows UMLS. Sorry, Ryan. I can give you a little bit of a tutorial UMLS, but leverage those things. People, get so tunnel vision that I need to build a model, I need to write a regression. No, they're not solving a problem at that point. They're just building their own little thing. So that's my gripe against the whole thing. So just wanted to
100% agree, both Vipul and Arun. We work with incredibly talented, we call them founders in residence. These are usually veteran CEOs that we bring in to take an idea that we validated and then actually help us build it over a time-gated period of time. And most of these individuals are very effective across sales, business development, perhaps product as well. not all of them have actually had experience building AI products before. So there are a lot of mistakes, or there are a lot of poor assumptions that are actually made before that engagement actually starts. And a lot of what you guys have been discussing actually rings true in that respect. I mean, just a handful of the questions that we usually get, which I have a long list of lessons learned with FIRs and best practices for new PMs. And some of the questions that come across are like, shouldn't we be using some shiny model recently featured in the news? Call it diffusion, for instance, since that's better than anything else before it. No, probably not. Probably not for the application that we're talking about. Most models are narrow in their scope, and you shouldn't be using something that that perhaps doesn't apply really to this customer domain, or maybe doesn't even need a model at all. To Vipul's point, you just need a rule for it. Another one which I get all the time is, we have all this data. Like, why don't we just, put it in a blender, shake it up, see what happens? Like, no. All the work that Arun is talking about with respect to data curation, feature engineering, ensuring all the labels are accurate. This is what I would liken to. This is what I usually tell the FIRs. You're trying to prepare a 3-course meal because your in-laws are coming in and you want to impress them. You already have all the ingredients, your data, in the kitchen, and you need to figure out how to make a meal that is going to, really wow them. Are you going to put all that in a blender and pour it out in some cups and call it a day? Probably not. You're going to be combining the ingredients, cooking the meat, and there's a lot of work that goes on in the kitchen before you actually ship something. So no, you can't just put it all in a deep learning model and it'll figure it out for you. There's, I got dozens of these, but yes, a lot of mistaken assumptions that are made, and it's up to us to ensure that that we can try to correct for that.
Yeah, you're always on thin ice if you start a product conversation with, "Hey, I want to build this model."
Yeah.
And you're like, wait a minute, who are we building it for and why?
Yeah.
Because maybe, to take your analogy, Ryan, like, the in-laws actually, we didn't realize it, but they're bringing dinner. And their biggest problem is they need a place to sleep, and we didn't get the guest room set up, and we've been just geeking out in the kitchen, with this new blender technology, and they're like, "What are you talking about?" So, I want to hit a couple of questions in the chat that just came up as we were talking. So, just going back in time a little bit, so we're about the displacement, the East-West thing. So Saeed Khan was saying, in the West, it has been the modus of operandi that there has been displacement. And so people naturally might be reasonable to be a little bit suspicious when they hear about new technology coming in, because they don't think of it as, oh, if you have this new technology, you're going to make my job better, but more maybe just as risky is that you might not increase my headcount, or you might actually let me go in the long run. Ryan, are your any thoughts on, like, how is that not a bigger issue in Japan? How are they more open to it? Is it because they have like a labor shortage, or what's the why the difference between the East and West?
I mean, we can get into the macroeconomics, of course, of say technology adoption across different countries and different levels of development. But I would say, just for the sake of time, that a general framework for this would be looking at the respective balance between System 1 and System 2 thinking with respect to a given role or a given set of tasks. If there is something that say requires a lot of things that you have to do that are not easily automated, that require a lot more creative thinking, or perhaps a lot of combined intersectional context that you bring together, those roles are usually a lot safer. There are also, the roles, of course, like frontline workers, for instance. I can think of, say, customer service representatives is probably an example here, that are concerned, of course, about artificial intelligence displacing them in some capacity. The best way to try to protect against that is to say recognize what probably can and cannot be automated, and also think about how you can work alongside or augment the AI system as well, in order to improve the entire workflow. So that could be, say, you've been in this business a long time, you already have a very good understanding of how of how, say, context-specific customers may need to have certain things resolved. You could be working with, you could be raising these issues to the team and trying to help improve the system that you're working alongside, or you could be at the same time investigating what other things you could be bringing to the table that does not yet exist for that system. It's very hypothetical, but it's true that there are roles that are going to be displaced. There are roles that are more easily automated, but then at the same time, in doing so, that emerges an entire new category of roles that are designed for the next problem that now we have to solve. You said diffusion models earlier. A lot of artists, say on Fiverr, or freelance artists who do a lot of, say, lo-fi design assets for enterprises, are worried about being displaced. But diffusion models have then opened up this entire new domain of prompt engineering to more creatively guide the model to creating the types of assets that you would hope to see, instead of just throwing darts at the wall and seeing what comes out. So totally new domain, very grassroots, and a lot of the artists that were being displaced are also getting very good at engineering these diffusion models to generate exactly what they would want to have generated themselves, but 10x faster.
So completely agree with what you've said so far. But I think what you were doing you were coming at from an individual level.
Yeah.
And but I think there is something about Japanese culture, about Eastern cultures, where it's more about the society and the family. And you probably know this, Ryan. I think they have some kind of they believe that the employee is actually a member of a family, and they take that very seriously, right? So I think, and this is like a very idealistic stance. Maybe we need to kind of create a similar culture here as well, where and honestly speaking, if I am a part owner of a company through stock options or whatnot, maybe over time I will want to optimize my stock options more than my current job, and I may be more open to understanding how this new technology could help me move forward, maybe to a different organization. So I'm just kind of bringing in the cultural and social aspect of it.
Oh, sorry. Finish.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm done. Go ahead.
No.
Yeah.
No. I was saying just one quick thing. One thing that helped me understand the culture, the book, The Goal, which talks about the adoption of the Kanban system at Toyota, right? And I think like if you read that book, you understand the mindset and how they view efficiency. And I think it's a great way of understanding. Sorry, just it came to mind when you were chatting.
Thank you. Did you say The Goal? I'll order it and read it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, we only have the time flew by on this panel. I know we said we were going to go 45 minutes and we need to wrap in a little bit, but why don't we, a couple things. We probably should do a part 2 of this panel, maybe in the new year or something. But before we go, first of all, thank you to Arun, Vipul, and Ryan for coming on to the pod to discuss this important topic. And then I guess the second thing is like, what kind of key takeaways should someone who's watching this think about in terms of, let's say if they're a PM that's in a product role where they're working on AI stuff, where they want to get more involved in it, what advice would you have for that person? And we'll start with Arun and go around.
Yeah, I think, be as obsessed with your customer needs as possible. Really, really, really drill down on it. You may not get it right the first time or the second time, but, if you ask the whys 5 times, you will kind of get to it. The what and how are pretty prevalent right now in the market, but the whys are lacking. So really, really focus on that. As a PM, I think just, and this is something that came through Amazon. I say like I was a different writer after Amazon. Being able to really distill your ideas into a very concise manner is really critical to getting everyone on board. You are a PM, you have to influence a lot of people. Figure out what your rhythm of business is to bring the other teams on board. And once you get them, focused on the why, the what and how become totally easy. So that's kind of what I've learned so far. But yeah.
I will just paraphrase what Arun said. I think the why is critical, and in my dictionary that corresponds to value identification and the messaging. Like Steve Jobs says, right? You should be able to explain to your grandmother how it works, right? That's an awesome metaphor. So value articulation, you should be able to put it down in simple terms. If you're not able to do it, that means you don't understand it well enough. And the second big thing I would say is become data literate. This is a data driven world out there. You are going nowhere if you don't understand data. I would say, even if you are an arts major, it is important for you to understand data and models and stuff like that. Not in the sense of engineering them, but as a consumer, like prompt engineering is a great example. So those are my two takeaways.
Yeah, I think to plus one Arun and Vipul. Arun, the best writers that I know all come from Amazon. So 100%. You need to get good at communicating your intent very concisely, because you only have 6 pages to do it within the Amazon context. To Vipul's point on data literacy, learn Python, learn SQL. It's not that difficult, and you're going to need to be able to do it in order to actually interface with what these AI systems are going to be ingesting in order to learn and improve. And so you need to have at least some base level understanding of how that works. There's tons of courses out there, like, Andrew Ng has published a lot on deeplearning.ai, which is a sister company of Coursera. Like AI for Everyone is a great one. There are some intro ones that are designed for CEOs or PMs for more general. There are some for healthcare as well. I know we got a lot of healthcare folks on this panel. But yeah, to finish it off, I would just say, look, as the PM, you are the domain expert. It is your responsibility to truly understand what the customer's needs and desires are, even if they are not explicitly stated by the customer. And so when you're working with your AI team, your engineering team, or your data scientists as well, that manifests in, say, having to know what are the specified acceptance criteria for this to be considered market ready, okay? Because that is going to communicate actually how you message the value that you're delivering. What are the severity of different kinds of errors? Is precision more important, or is recall more important, for instance? And then what are the relevant constraints that you're operating in? We talked about healthcare, we talked about fintech. Both of these have severe constraints on what data you can and cannot use. And you shouldn't expect your data scientists and engineers to know all of this right out of the box. It's up to you to actually bring that information to the table. So that's how I would end it.
Love it. I'll share my 3 things for a PM working in AI. First question I would say is ask yourself clearly what problem are you solving and for whom. The second is to kind of reinforce Vipul's point. Where are you getting the data? What is the state of the data? How will you maintain it over time? How will it scale? And then the third one, maybe kind of borrowing Ryan's point about, iterating, is how will you execute and measure success? And success should be linked to the first thing. It should not just be like, oh, area under the curve. Like we're talking about real value to customers. So
you tell someone like, oh, we got X% AUC, and they're like,
what
was that?
Well, yeah, exactly. How did that translate?
Yes, yeah. So thank you so much for giving us a little bit of your weekend. It's been an awesome discussion, and hope we'll continue it. And if folks are watching this found it useful, remember to like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff, and put in the comments any questions you want us to answer in our future panel, and we'll put it together. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Take care, guys.
See ya. Bye.